The Sweden that I had visited and lectured in and know something about used to be so righteously fair, which is now suicidal, unfortunately. And they have they've elected more women, they've had more gender parity in government. It's unbelievable that they would now squander all this moral wealth that they've achieved because they're afraid of being called racists if they stop criminal behavior, or if they call it for what it is, or if they prosecute it. On the one hand, there are individuals genuinely in flight from barbaric persecution. Women, children, genuinely. And I think the West should offer them asylum. But on the other hand, there are criminals, jihadists, and psychopaths among them who are not productive and who prey on their own. I mean, the refugee camps, or where the refugees or the migrants live, is fraught with enormous danger. They kill each other, one tribe, one version of Islam, Shia versus Sunni, knife fights, murders of homosexuals, which is very ironic because so much of Muslim society is homoerotic. Men are far more the preferred love interest than women, who are merely for breeding and domestic slavery. And one can argue that allowing immigrants to come and not forcing them to integrate is a form of soft racism. Absolutely. And thinking that they will do the dirty work that the Europeans no longer want to do, soft racism. It doesn't have to stay that way. It could start that way. The next generation can get education and become integrated. But what we've seen also is that the third and fourth generations are more radical than their grandparents, which means that they've been indoctrinated via the internet, via cable vision, via doctored footage. And it's such a tragedy. It is such... Now we could say, well, wouldn't it have made better sense if Europe was going to be spending all this money to simply relocate them in their own countries and pay for them to survive as best they can in their own countries, in their own languages, rather than uproot and transplant. Historically, Islam has been has practiced religious apartheid and religious supremacism and gender apartheid. And Westerners don't seem to understand that Islam has a history in which Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Baha'i are to be exterminated, and have been. First, with the Jews, of course, you tax them, and you tax them very heavily, and then when you're done with that, you either take away their entire fortunes, if they have them, or you simply possess their property, petty or grand, and then torture them and jail them, and if they're very lucky, you exile them. So the Middle East is now completely Judenrein. There are no Jews left. There's 30,000 some odd hostages in Iran, but otherwise it's completely Judenrein. And the nature of anti-Semitism today, the new anti-Semitism, is not only the betrayal by the intelligentsia of the West, the scapegoating of Israel as the Jew of the world, but the alliance between Western intellectuals and jihadic, radical Islamists and plain old Muslims who hate Jews, who have been taught to hate Jews. And the fight with Israel is a theological war that Israel can't solve, that Israel can't win, because Muslims believe there should be no Jew left standing alive. Certainly not in sovereign space, and not even in secular space like Tel Aviv. And this is so hard to get Westerners to understand. No, it's because of the alleged occupation. No, it's because of the humiliation that they suffered when they were stopped at the gates of Vienna, which they haven't gotten over in the 17th century. Oh, no, it's their poverty. No, it's from the wars that they've escaped from. No, all of these things are factors, true, but it is a theological war in which the leaders of Islam and the superstitious, ill-led mobs of Islam believe that it is their destiny and their duty to wipe out every other religion save Islam, which means submission. When I was more of a leftist in my youth, when I first saw the Arab world appear in London and to a lesser extent than in Paris, and then in Athens, in Greece, I thought, well, the chickens have come home to roost. Now the colonial powers are going to have to absorb the formerly colonized. And I had a grim, ironic sense of justice. I do not look at it. Now, many people with that kind of Stalinist head still look at it that way, that the West has become enriched because it mined and plundered the resources of the developing, undeveloped world, because it trafficked in human slavery, which is all true, by the way. And now, the dreadfully uneducated, the unwashed, the wretched of the earth, a la Frantz Fanon, have now, the chickens have come home to roost. That's Malcolm X's phrase. Now we pay the price. We flourished at the expense of others who were ruined, and now we have to be ruined. See, it's not like now we'll all flourish, now we'll be cooperative and we'll do things. No, now we have to be ruined because the resentments of that which is both feared, envied, and longed for is going to lead to people who are tribal would love freedom, but they dare not have it. It's too dangerous. So how dare you act free or tell me, a tribal person, that I should do it or I can do it, because it means it would destroy my very identity, my social network, my understanding of life and its meaning. The people who most minimize terrorism and its dangers and its significance might be more afraid of it than I am, who look at it more clearly. And they want to appease it. They want to be on the right side of the so-called Muslim Nazis, so that maybe they'll be spared. They'll be the good people who stood up for the jihadists. So it's fear, the choice of appeasement as a weapon to deal with their own fear. Then it's also the desire to be popular in one's own circle, which in these times means being Islamically correct. And there's such a confusion between a religion, a faith, Islam, and race. Now that's a deft disinformation campaign, bringing in Palestinian rights, Arab rights, jihadist rights, and Black Lives Matter in America. All to the detriment, of course, of the Jewish state, but to the greater detriment of the Western enterprise. I think we can say that feminists, who in my time, second wave feminism, raised the alarm and challenged the consciousness of the entire world about violence against women, about women's rights, about women's dignity and right to freedom and autonomy. And we did so many things that are still at work in the world. Now, these are the women who are feminists, and there are men among us too. These are the feminists who you would think would be right out there condemning honor killing, condemning stoning to death, condemning the automatic rape of female prisoners in Evin prison in Tehran, and their murder by the state, often because they've killed an attacker in self-defense, or because they were just female, born female, which is a capital crime. And you would expect feminists to say, wait, stop, no. What we see instead is feminism, like the rest of the Western progressive movements, has been hijacked by racism, which trumps sexism. Sexism is completely inferior to racism, and men who've been colonized, especially Muslim men, Arab Muslim men, Palestinian, whatever that may be, Muslim men, are the most sacred of victims, the Uba victims, and that is the most important. Now, if you sit and talk with a real feminist, not a fake or faux feminist, you'll hear a range of things like, well, they don't think the state should make a woman not face veil because that's interfering with her bodily integrity. They'll say they don't think that the state should criminalize prostitution or surrogacy because that's interfering with her bodily integrity. So even the best liberal thought in feminism is now curdled. It's like spoiled milk when it comes to confronting very serious femicide. So if they criticize it, then they'll be violating some of their own principles. If they criticize it, they will be immediately tarred and feathered as racists, and even though they're victims who we should be standing by, are women of color also. So feminists, the best feminists, have totally lost their way. The mass rapes in Cologne, the mass rapes in Tahrir Square in Egypt, in Cairo, the groping and the mass rapes all over Europe, the media is quiet about, then the government is quiet about it. The murder and torture of Jews, it's a mental illness, nothing. He's screaming his head off, Allahu Akbar, but we don't know really what drove him to it. Maybe he smoked dope, maybe his wife gave him a hard time, maybe he was wrestling with his own inner demons or his own repressed homosexuality. All kinds of excuses are given for jihad. And because to do otherwise, to say, well, no, anti-Semitism is on the rise and it's coming to us directly from a very toxic and lethal Muslim version of it, making common cause with Western peoples. A little bit on the right, but mainly on the left. Western intellectuals on the left. When I came back from Kabul, and this was very early, it was the end of 1961, there was no Taliban. The Soviets had not yet tried to take over the country or invaded it. Hope was rising. Indeed, women would start being naked-faced and wearing more modern Western clothing without gloves and hijab and long, heavy coats, which was the custom among upper-class women when I was there. Even then, when I tried to tell my bohemian and intellectual college mates, I tried to say something about human slavery, about the mistreatment and brutalization of female servants by their female employers, about polygamy, about purdah, the sequestration of women. So I couldn't go out without a male escort. And they didn't understand. They said, oh, but didn't you meet the king? Didn't you have servants? Are you now a princess? And I could not get through because there was a fantasy world about the East. Westerners, many Westerners have indeed romanticized the East, and there is a beauty to it and a danger to it too. Both are twins. And nobody wants to hear that, oh, in Afghanistan there used to be a flourishing Buddhist country, and it was a Buddhist culture, and now it's kaput because Muslims came from the Middle East and converted everyone via the sword. You didn't convert, you die. Nobody wants to hear this. Or the burqa. When I first saw it the first time, I was very shaken. And the women then would be pushed to the back of the line in a bazaar. Male servants would just jostle them if they had no servants and had to shop for themselves, or kicked to the back of the bus. I was horrified. Even Freud understood, or Freud especially understood, that there's eros and thanatos. And we could say that Europe is acting as if it's in the grip of thanatos. It's in the grip of death.